Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's program, The Effect of Vicarious Trauma on Trial Lawyers. I'm Ala Policastro, Director of Education and Professional Development at Beverly Hills Bar Association. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today's program, Cristina Garcia. Cristina is a trial attorney at Dolan Law Firm, where she specializes in representing child survivors of sexual abuse in schools, as well as individuals in cases involving personal injury and wrongful death. She has been recognized as a Super Lawyer Rising Star, a Best Lawyers One to Watch, and received the Presidential Award of Merit from the Consumer Attorneys of California. She serves on the board of directors for both the Consumer Attorneys of California and the Latina Lawyers Bar Association. We're so excited to have her with us today, so I'm going to turn it over to her now.
Thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As Leah mentioned, I'm a plaintiff side personal injury attorney with the Dolan Law Firm, and today we're going to be discussing the effects of vicarious trauma on trial lawyers. Next slide, please. So I handle a lot of sexual abuse cases in schools, as well as catastrophic injury and wrongful death cases. As a personal injury attorney, I am constantly exposed to the survivors or injured person's trauma, whether by listening to their stories, reviewing case material, preparing for depositions, or retelling the story to opposing counsel, mediators, or juries. Next slide. So in our legal profession, the exposure to trauma is not unique to one area of practice. I've listed a few other practices here in which lawyers are exposed to constant trauma. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list. For example, family law. Family law attorneys handle disputes between spouses over child custody, which can get vicious. There could also be domestic violence issues, which add to the client's trauma. Immigration law. Immigration lawyers are dealing with very stressful and volatile circumstances, especially at this time. They're having to deal with unprecedented situations and rules that are constantly changing. Whereas for many of our practice, our rules remain the same. For immigration, right now, all of those rules are changing and it's a very stressful environment. Criminal law. Criminal lawyers are exposed to very heavy graphic content, particularly if they are assigned to the Special Victims Unit or homicide cases. Personal injury, as I noted in this field, we have constant contact with clients whose lives have been altered or forever changed by the loss of a loved one. And lastly, bankruptcy law. These are lawyers who are dealing with clients whose financial worlds have fallen apart. Next slide. So as attorneys, we are tasked not only with addressing the legal aspect of a case, but also with offering reassurance and support to our clients, which requires empathy and compassion. Therefore, it's not surprising that those representing traumatized individuals may themselves become physically and emotionally depleted. Next slide. I'm going to start with a couple of definitions, which, although they may appear basic, I do think they're important to understand for the topic we will be discussing today. So trauma is defined as a psychological and emotional response to an event or an experience that is deeply distressing or disturbing. This event or experience overwhelms a person's ability to cope. Next. The American Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, 5th edition, which is also referred to as DSM-5, briefly describes trauma as exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Next. What is vicarious trauma? So, vicarious trauma is the experience of absorbing others' pain in times of their distress so deeply that it affects your own well being. And this is a result of repeated exposure to those traumatic experiences. Next. Recent research has found that there is a connection between post-traumatic stress disorder and secondary trauma. So PTSD is a mental health condition that is triggered by experiencing or witnessing a traumatic event. So that could be reliving or re-experiencing nightmares, flashbacks, triggers. A person experiencing PTSD may also have symptoms of hyperarousal or being on guard. So they're always feeling jittery or they're overly alert. They're constantly in the fight or flight or freeze response. They have difficulty sleeping and concentrating. They feel angry and irritable. Next. Secondary trauma is a concept that has received significant scholarly attention in the recent years. Karen M. Seeley wrote a book that's called Therapy After Terror 9/11, Psychotherapists and Mental Health. What she did in this book is that she examined the 2001 World Trade Center attack from the perspectives of the New York City mental health professionals who treated patients affected by the attack. Next. So Seeley, who is a licensed clinical social worker herself, she offered a comprehensive examination of the work and the experience of the psychotherapists in the aftermath of 9/11. So in her book, she notices that these psychotherapists that are treating patients who were affected by 9/11 started displaying similar symptoms of PTSD due to the constant exposure that they had by hearing the stories of their patients. Next. So how is PTSD and secondary trauma related? So in 2013, the DSM-5 introduced an additional category of causation of PTSD. And in this, it stated that PTSD symptoms could be experienced by the repeated or extreme exposure to details of traumatic events. So the person developing these symptoms do so in the course of their professional duties. Similar to nurses and doctors, we as lawyers also constantly engage with this traumatic material, whether it's photographs of car accidents, injuries, wrongful deaths, and things like that. Next. So why does it matter? Vicarious trauma is an unavoidable occupational hazard for diligent and humane lawyers who care deeply for their clients. The intensity of this compassion and empathy over time leads to vicarious traumatization. A way to avoid vicarious trauma is to fail to engage compassionately or even empathetically with one's clients. But given that you're all here for this webinar, that tells me that you care for your clients and you want to empathize with them, but you also want to take care of your own well-being, because in order to care for our clients, we need to care for ourselves first. Next. So although in the past it seemed that the state bar was not too concerned with the emotional or mental health of lawyers, it appears that it has become a growing concern recently. So not too long ago, the state bar implemented a duty of competence, which is State Bar of California Rule 1.1. And this rule provides that a lawyer shall not intentionally, recklessly with gross negligence, or repeatedly fail to perform legal services with competence. And under this rule, competence is in any legal service shall mean to apply the learning and skill and mental, emotional, and physical ability reasonably necessary for the performance of such service. So under this state bar rule, mental and emotional wellness is part of our duty of competence as lawyers. So I heard about the raging river analogy a few years ago, and I thought it was a really good way to explain the secondary trauma that a lot of lawyers experience through their clients. Next. So for this analogy, imagine that your client lives at the center of a raging river. Their lawyer, which is you, stands at the edge of the river as a huge boulder is dropped just in front of your client. So your client is knocked down by the immediate towering wave that the boulder creates. The waves completely cover him, washing over him, soaking him. The impact of the rushing water topples him each time, and he struggles and continues to struggle to keep himself standing. Next. So the lawyer who's standing at the edge of the river is eventually also struck by those waves and ripples created by the boulder. The waves are different, however, similar in shape and character to the initial waves. So the lawyer also stands at the intersection of many such rivers, receiving similar waves and ripples from many directions. So this raging river analogy provides an overall visual image for the concepts of vicarious trauma, secondary traumatic stress, and compassionate fatigue. The raging river is the day-to-day stressful condition the client lives in. The boulder represents a trauma occurring in the life of the client. And the towering waves represent the client's initial experience of that trauma. And the lesser waves and ripples represent the secondary trauma experienced by the lawyer. And as I mentioned, as the lawyer, we don't have one client, we have many clients. So it's as if many rivers are coming at us in different directions, different waves and different shapes, as we're absorbing all the different trauma from our different clients. The terms compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, and vicarious trauma are related, but distinct concepts arising from secondary exposure to trauma. So this concept was originally studied in first responders, nurses, and doctors, but is now recognized as a risk for lawyers and other helping professions as well. Dr. Charles Figley is the founder of the Traumatology Institute and a leading author in this field. He has a lot of work discussing compassion fatigue and discussing how people who are helping professionals, such as nurses, doctors, lawyers, we experience compassion fatigue because we take in our client's experience, we empathize with them, we want to make sure that they feel heard. But at some point, after this constant exposure, our gas tends to run on empty, right? And we're starting to feel that fatigue of caring so much for all of our clients. So his work has greatly contributed to the understanding of compassionate stress in professionals. Next. So he defined compassion fatigue and secondary traumatic stress as follows. Compassion fatigue is the emotional and physical exhaustion that can affect helping professionals over time. And secondary traumatic stress is described as the trauma experienced indirectly by hearing about traumatic events affecting others. He also referred to compassion fatigue as the result of the cost of caring. And this cost of caring can manifest symptoms similar to PTSD. So this constant secondary exposure that as lawyers we experience can definitely lead to vicarious trauma. Psychologists Laurie A. Perlman and Kay Savigny coined the term vicarious trauma. And it is used to describe the profound shift in worldview that occurs in helping professionals when they work with clients who have experienced trauma. So when someone is experiencing vicarious trauma, or I may refer to it as VT for short, their fundamental beliefs about the world are altered and possibly damaged by being repeatedly exposed to traumatic material. So they start believing that the world is a dangerous place and that all people are inherently bad. And VT is cumulative, so it happens over time. It's the constant exposure, the constant hearing of your clients' stories, as well as repeating those stories to whether it's a judge or a mediator. And that can significantly impact an attorney's personal and professional life. So vicarious trauma is not just a concept. It's a real diagnosis and something that also manifests itself not only in physical symptoms, but also emotional symptoms. So some of the physical symptoms are high levels of cortisol. So this is when your body is producing too much of the stress hormone, which is triggered by chronic stress. And this can lead to high blood pressure and high blood sugar. You may also be experiencing sleep disturbances. So you may find yourself tossing and turning in bed or constantly getting up because you're restless. You may experience hair loss, gastrointestinal problems. So common symptoms for this are abdominal pain and bloating. You may also experience weight gain. With the increased levels of cortisol, you may find that your appetite has increased. So you're feeling hungrier and more often. And a lot of the time, your cravings are for sugary and fatty foods. You may also experience headaches, and this may be more noticeable if you're someone who would rarely suffer from headaches, and then recently you find yourself having constant headaches. Chronic fatigue is also a physical symptom. So this is when someone's feeling extremely tired all the time, and that tiredness tends to sometimes last more than 6 months. And even when they get a good night's rest, they still wake up feeling foggy-minded and extremely fatigued. An impaired immune system is also a symptom. So people experiencing this will find themselves getting sick more often, or they will find that they're having a hard time getting over a cold, an infection, or whatever illness it is that they have. And rapid pulse and breathing is also one of the symptoms. So this can happen when your brain activates the fight or flight response because it releases hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that quickens your heartbeat and causes shallow breathing. Next. So, as if physical symptoms weren't enough, there's also emotional symptoms that come along with it. So emotional numbness or feeling disconnected. So this is when your brain shuts off feelings like joy, sadness, or anger to survive trauma or a high stress situation. Feeling disillusioned by humanity. So this is heavy. It's a painful weight that often comes from emotional burnout. You're constantly seeing the bad behavior in the world, and it makes you feel like you've lost faith in humanity. Changes in the worldview are considered inevitable. Feelings of hopelessness. The person may feel despair, a lack of positive expectations for the future. They may also believe that nothing will ever improve. They can also experience cynicism. So they may adopt an attitude marked by deep distrust of human motives. So they believe that people act only out of selfishness. Pessimism. They're expecting the worst outcome. They're focusing on the negative side of life, and they believe that pain or evil is more common than good. And lastly, here we have hypervigilance. So people experiencing this symptom may feel as if danger is lurking in every corner. So they're always at the edge of their seat, keeping an eye out for danger. Next. So these effects may cause attorneys to withdraw or isolate themselves. They start to fail to find pleasure in activities that they once enjoyed. They also become detached from others, not just at work, but in their personal lives as well. So lawyers might feel that they have lost their compassion. Next. So when you're living in a state of vicarious trauma, it becomes harder to maintain a level of compassion. You start to notice that you're exhibiting little or no empathy or no sympathy for other people. Sometimes you may compare clients, and this is the way that it manifests. For example, in personal injury, you may have a client who unfortunately had to have their leg amputated. And then you have a client who had a broken ankle. And you might be on the phone with the client with the broken ankle who is just telling you how difficult life is and the many things that they are unable to do in their daily activities. And in your mind, you're thinking, yes, it's bad, but it's not as bad as this person who had the amputated leg, and they're doing their best to survive and to come out in front of this. And so all of that is part of that compassion fatigue, right? It's not that you care less about your client that has the broken ankle. It's just that you're tired of having all that empathy, and in your brain you're starting to exhibit less empathy for some people than others by comparing, who may have it worse, if you can say it that way. So another thing that occurs is avoidance. So you may receive emails or phone calls from a client and you know that that client has a particularly traumatic story, and you may not feel ready to quite jump into that conversation, so you kind of just put it aside and try to avoid it as long as you can. So all of this can leave you feeling like there's a sense that you have stopped caring for your clients. But in reality, the intensity of care and empathy for your clients is what led you to experience post-traumatic symptoms like numbness. Repeated exposure to client trauma can lead to substance abuse. And it's no secret that, unfortunately, in the legal profession, there is a history of alcohol and drug abuse. The chronic stress can negatively impact a person's impulse control, learning, and memory functions. And so, as a result of that, a lot of lawyers may self-medicate with alcohol or drugs. And it's important to note that the majority of disciplinary matters handled by the state bar are due to lawyers dealing with mental health issues or alcohol and drug issues. Next. So, how can we mitigate these vicarious trauma symptoms? So, education is a big part of it, learning more about it and how it can affect us and the way that it manifests itself, not just physically, but emotionally as well. It's important to continue educating yourself on the topic. There's been a lot of research, a larger body of research that has been done in recent years regarding this concept. And now that it has been acknowledged that lawyers are at risk for this secondary trauma, not just, you know, doctors, first responders, there is larger resources and information out there about this. And it's important to educate ourselves, not just for ourselves, but also for our colleagues, right? For our other friends that are also in the profession, and you might notice these symptoms that they're displaying, and they may need assistance with that. So it's important to acknowledge the trauma that you're dealing with, talk about it, normalize it, and don't allow it to have a stigma that you are weak for taking a proactive approach. So in the materials, I've included a vicarious trauma assessment. And it's a pretty short assessment. It's 2 pages and it has about 30 questions. And it's a pretty quick answer. It gives you numbers 1 through 5 as to whether you never experience this, rarely, sometimes, often, or very often. Next. And I would encourage everyone to take the assessment. I know that a lot of you will have the intention to return to this assessment to complete it, but life gets busy and you may never come back to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read the questions that appear on the first page. And as I read them, you should think whether this is something that you never feel, rarely, sometimes, often, or very often. So the first one is, I feel overwhelmed by the thought of going to work each day. The next one is, I feel exhausted from the moment I get to work. Three, I am unable to stop thinking about a particular situation I worked on. 4, I have little motivation when I am at work. 5, I have a difficult time not thinking about work when I'm at home. 6, I am startled easily by loud noises. 7, I am easily irritated and have a harder time coming back to center once I am irritated. 8, I feel like I have little to no control over my day-to-day life. 9, I feel as though I am experiencing the trauma of someone else that I have helped. 10, I am preoccupied with wanting to follow up with specific clients. 11, I feel overwhelmed by the system I work within. 12, I have difficult time seeing any good in the work I have done. 13, I feel trapped by my work. And 14, I am having difficult time sleeping. Okay. We can go on to the next slide. Okay. So there is a second page with additional questions, and once you are done filling in the numbers that you're feeling for each question, then you can go at the end here and it will show you a score. It ranges from 30 to 33, which is no signs of burnout. So you're doing great if you're in this section. 34 to 62, low risk of burnout unless some factors are particularly severe. And then on the right-hand column, it gives you more of a description of the classification. Then you have 62 to 75, which is high burnout risk. And so at this point, if you're scoring here, you may want to start checking in with yourself and really see how you're feeling, if you're exhibiting any of the vicarious trauma symptoms that we discussed earlier. 75 to 90, that's burnout. And 90 to 150, this is vicarious trauma. So again, it only takes a few minutes. I think it's a good way to check in with yourself, to fill it out. And depending on where you land on the rubric, you may want to seek professional help or implement some of the strategies to mitigate that vicarious trauma that we'll be discussing in the following slides. So how do we mitigate these vicarious trauma symptoms? So a big one is support network. So you want to be able to join bar associations and go to events to create meaningful connections with others in your profession. And not just in your specific legal field, but across other fields. You may find that other lawyers have interests outside of the law that you may also share with them. Also engage in activities that you find meaningful. A lot of the time when we're suffering from the secondary trauma or this compassion fatigue, you just feel empty. You feel like you don't have any more empathy to give. And sometimes it's easy to lose sight as to why we're here. So as lawyers, I know the majority of us became lawyers because we're passionate about what we do, whether it's helping people. And that is the reason why we became lawyers and we're so passionate about it. But when you're experiencing compassion fatigue, this can be lost. You may start feeling, I'm not even sure why I'm in this profession. So doing things like mentoring can be meaningful, and it can remind you why you chose to go into law. Participating in professional development programs, that can also assist you and reinvigorate that passion of yours. And social network outside of the law. I love my lawyer friends, but it's also nice to have friends that are not lawyers. So join groups, organizations that are not law related, but are of interest to you. Next. Okay. So self-care is central to the capacity to care for others. And by self-care, I don't mean purchasing nice candles or treating yourself to a massage, although you should still do that if you enjoy that. But I am talking about self-care as something that is more intentional and a practice that you can engage in regularly. So with coping with vicarious trauma, you want to position yourself as a conduit rather than a sponge. So you don't want to be absorbing all of that trauma and keeping it within yourself, right? You want to find ways to allow others' pain to just flow through you rather than you soaking it in. So our client's trauma deserves our attention, and it can alert us to bad situations, but it doesn't do any good for us to carry that trauma of those events. So coping with vicarious trauma, this self-care is going to look different for everyone, right? Because everybody has different interests, but it's important to find hobbies that you find fun, that are engaging, such as gardening. That is one thing that I tried to take up, but was very bad at. So that quickly fizzled out for me. But you can try hiking, baking, journaling, painting, camping, cycling, bird watching. Next. And maybe you might try golf. So a few years ago, I started playing golf. I had never touched a golf club in my life, but my husband started getting into golf and invited me to come along. I will be honest, I was not interested at all, but he convinced me by telling me it was a nice scenery, it was nice to get outside. He also said I would be able to drive the golf cart and have my snacks and drinks with me. So I said, all right, after he asked several times, I figured, why don't we give it a try? So it turns out that I really enjoyed it. Being out in the fresh air, seeing the trees, the geese, the ponds, it really helped me relax. And for a moment, I was truly disconnected from work. I don't know if any of you have played golf, but it's really hard to try to concentrate on hitting that ball and thinking about something else. Especially when you're starting out. I definitely missed that ball several times. But one thing that golf is also great at is teaching you positive self-talk. So you may have gone on to the first hole and done a terrible shot, right? And you just can't seem to get that ball on the green. But you have to tell yourself, that's okay. This shot is a new shot. And the same thing when you move on to the next hole, right? The first hole was a bad hole. That's fine. Leave it in the past. You move on to the second hole, you put your best foot forward. And I think that positive talk is really important, especially for us as lawyers when we're feeling overwhelmed and we're experiencing that compassion fatigue. The way that we talk to ourselves is really important because we really do internalize those feelings. Even if we don't mean them, our brain is processing that. So it's really important to practice positive self-talk. So a few other strategies that you can also implement in order to mitigate that vicarious trauma is by practicing grounding techniques. So grounding techniques are simple practices that help shift your focus away from intense anxiety, panic, or overwhelming emotions and back to the present moment. So there is a particularly grounding technique that's pretty popular, and it's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what you do in that technique is that first you think of 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. So for purposes of our webinar here today, I want us to go through that technique. You will think about those 5 things to yourself, and I will think of those 5 things for myself as well. But I just want you to practice that technique. So first, let's think of 5 things that you can see. All right, so now think about 4 things that you can touch. Now think about 3 things you can hear. Two things that you can smell. And 1 thing that you can taste. So what this does is that in the last few seconds that we were thinking about these things, your brain was disengaging from any other thoughts that you may have had. So when you're at work and you're feeling overwhelmed or anxious about something that you're doing, try this technique. It's quick, but it also helps your brain to just relax and bring yourself back to the present moment. Um, and another technique that you can try is mindfulness. So mindfulness is the simple practice of being fully aware of the present moment without judging your thoughts or your feelings. So this helps lower stress, improve focus, and calm your mind. A lot of the focus is on your breath. And you're doing a body scan to pay attention to how each part of your body feels from your head to your toes. So when you're practicing mindfulness, you're first focusing on your breathing. And the important part of this is what it means by without judgment or other feelings is that if you're trying to focus on your breathing and you suddenly find yourself thinking about work, about the kids, about your partner, about a host of other problems that you may have going on, don't talk negatively to yourself, right? Don't say, oh geez, I couldn't even keep it together for 1 minute. That's the whole part of the mindfulness part, to not have negative talk. You know, if you lost your thought and your thought went somewhere else other than your breath, it's okay. Just bring it back and continue to breathe and exhale and continue to scan your body from your head to your toes. The first few times that you do it, it's going to be hard and it's going to be distracting. But as you practice it, you will get better at it. Regular exercise is also helpful. And while it would be great, you know, if you can get an hour of exercise a day or every other day, we know that as lawyers, sometimes that's not possible, especially if you're in trial or have back-to-back depositions. But you can still incorporate some exercise into your daily routine. So it can be as simple as getting up from your desk to take a quick 10 to 15-minute walk. I know that oftentimes we may be working on a brief, on trial documents, or preparing for depositions, and we feel like we are in the zone. We don't want to get up because we just feel like our thoughts are firing up and we are typing away. However, if you've been there for a few hours, you really should try to get up and just do a quick 10-minute walk. It's just 10 minutes. And you will definitely feel more refreshed when you return to your desk. Meditation is also a really good strategy. So if you've never tried meditating before, there are plenty of self-guided meditation videos on YouTube that you can access. And I would suggest, you know, if you're trying it out for the first time, just do a short video just so that you can get a feel for it. And then once you develop a practice, you can increase the amount of time that you are meditating for. Vacations. So taking regular vacations is really important. You know, as lawyers, we sometimes use it as a badge of honor that we have hundreds of hours of PTO because we work so hard and we're not taking any time off. But we really do need to take some time off to avoid that burnout and that compassion fatigue. And it doesn't have to be, you know, an elaborate plan. It can even be something as simple of a staycation, right? Maybe you just take a Thursday and Friday off and you have, you know, those 4 days to stay within your city, but explore areas or locations you haven't gone to. There might be museums, there might be music festivals, going to the beach. All of those things can be very relaxing. I've definitely taken a part in doing a staycation before moving to LA. I lived in the Bay Area, and I worked in San Francisco, but I didn't live in San Francisco. So I commuted to San Francisco every day for about an hour and 30 minutes. And so while I was in San Francisco every day, I never really took the time to explore San Francisco because I was just in a hurry to get to the BART station and try to get home. But you know, one of those weekends, me and my husband said, let's just make it a 4-day weekend and pretend we're tourists. And we did. We took the ferry, we visited Alcatraz, we went to the pier. And for years, I've been going in and out of San Francisco, and I hadn't done several of the things that we did that day. So I think, you know, staycations are things that are simple to do, and it will definitely give your brain a little bit of a mental break. Next. So healthy sleep hygiene. I know that we all know this, but how many of you are actually getting enough sleep? Probably not many, myself included. I'm guilty of this too. According to the Academy of Sleep Medicine, adults should try to get 7 or more hours of sleep. And we all know that sleep is important for cognitive functioning, our mood, mental health, and for our heart health. And so try to do your best to get rest. One of the things that is recommended is having a dedicated space for sleep. So depending on your living situation, and especially after COVID with a lot of people working remote, people tended to have their desks in their bedroom. And so this can be disruptive for your sleep, even though you may not realize it. So to the extent that you're able to avoid this and separate your sleeping space from your workspace, that's a more ideal situation. And when you go to sleep, try to place your phone on do not disturb. Silence the notifications, and that will help with the quality of sleep that you get. For a long time, I actually didn't silence my email notifications on my phone, and it was just a constant pinging throughout the night for every email that would come in. And at one point I said, I really don't need to be hearing this constant pinging. And so I finally placed it on silent, and that small change made a world of a difference. One of the things that is recommended is to try to keep your phone away from you when you sleep, possibly across the room instead of right next to you on your nightstand. I'm still guilty of this. I have not gotten to the point where I can just leave my phone across the room. I do still keep it on my nightstand, but having those notifications on silent definitely helps. And one of the things that I would tend to do is that sometimes in the middle of the night, I would wake up with thoughts about a case or an argument that I wanted to add to a brief. And so what I would do is that I would open my phone and type in quick notes for myself. But then that would lead me to my calendar or sometimes to my email. So I would become completely awake and then just have trouble falling back asleep. But I then started implementing a technique that I got from a colleague, which is just place a notepad and a pen next to your nightstand. That way, if you know you have an urging thought that you just have to write down, you can just wake up, scribble it on the notepad, and put it right back and go back to sleep. And then you avoid the danger of potentially scrolling over to your email or to your calendar, and then it's 2 in the morning and you're just not getting the sleep that you need. Next. Okay. So taking care of yourself is really important. We deal with a lot of individuals that have been traumatized due to different circumstances in life. And it's important to get good sleep, try to eat healthy, get some exercise. I know it's a lot of things that many of us know that we should do, but we don't. So I think, hopefully you can take some of these strategies that I shared with you, so that you can implement them when you're having anxiety, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling compassion fatigue, or you're feeling like you're running out of empathy. Hopefully, a few of those things will help you. It's also really important for your personal life, right? So, outside of, although being an attorney is a big part of our life, we are also people outside of being attorneys, right? We're sisters, we're brothers, nieces. We have a life outside of that. And it also, how we're feeling at work, we bring that home with us. So our spouses, our family, they see what's going on with us, and they see whether we are actually present when we're at the dinner table with them, when we are engaging in activities. So in reality, taking care of yourself is not just so that you can be a competent attorney and continue to represent your clients zealously, but also so that you can have a good, healthy, rich personal life. So if you take anything from today, is that we all need to take care of ourselves, and try to implement, even if it's just the smallest strategy of the many that I listed here today, so that hopefully you can mitigate any vicarious trauma symptoms, avoid ending up with compassion fatigue. And again, if you are finding yourself that you are feeling depressed, or in a situation where it's hard to pull yourself out, you should seek therapy, right? In an ideal world, we should all have a therapist because we all deal with a lot of trauma that we absorb and need to learn how to let go. So thank you all today for attending, and here is my email in case you have questions about any other resources. I did provide in my materials an article that I wrote for the Advocate. I also did write one for the Daily Journal, but also, as I mentioned, that Vicarious trauma assessment, as well as other articles that elaborate on some of the topics that I discussed with you all here today.
This concludes today's presentation. Thank you so much, Cristina, for taking the time to educate our audience, and thank you so much to everyone joining us today. Have a great day, everybody.